Hello there and welcome back. In the previous episode, we finished working on our crafting system. So right now we have the inventory system, we have our crafting system, and we have this axe blueprint that we can craft. So right now we finished these two major systems, and all we have to do is just create more blueprints, more recipes, and for example, if we need other materials, we also need to create prefabs of those materials. So you may notice that our sticks finally look like something because in the previous episode we just used the default capsules, but I found this stick model and I replaced all the stick prefabs. So now it looks a little bit better. Of course, you can use something that looks even better in your project, but I think it will do. Right now we have these two major systems. We have the crafting system, we have the inventory system. And before we continue on in our game and create other things, we want to take this episode to just create a few small things, okay? So these won't be big systems, there will be small things, but they will add more details to our game. So the first thing we want to do is right now when we go into our inventory or crafting system, we can see that we use this default Windows cursor, okay? And also inside the inventory, and we want to make it look a little bit better because this white thing is not something that looks very good. So it's very simple to change the default cursor that we use inside the game. All we need to do is import an image of a cursor into our project. So I did it over here. So I actually created this cursor inside a very simple image editor. All I did was create these lines and then paint the middle and paint the lines, and that's it. And of course I created it on a transparent background and then I placed it inside this folder. Before we can actually make it our default cursor, we first need to click on it and import it. But because we want it to be a cursor, we need to go over here and we're not going to make it a sprite, but we're going to make it a cursor, okay? So just make sure, otherwise it won't work. So we select cursor, we leave everything as it is, we apply, and now it's imported into our game. But to set it as the default cursor, we go to File, Build Settings, and we go into Player Settings. And over here we can change the default icon and the default cursor. So all we do is take this and drag into the slot, okay? And now when we run the game, of course our little middle dot will still be the same, but when we go into the inventory, we have this custom cursor, okay? So this will be our cursor from now, and it looks much better than the white one, and you can do whatever you want. You can put some kind of little finger or maybe a sword or whatever fits your game, and it actually adds something to the game when we're not using the default white cursor that comes with Windows, okay? So now when you move inside Unity, you will still have the white one, but when you go inside the game and you run the game, we are going to use the cursor that we want. Of course, there's also a possibility to change our cursors in the middle of the game. So for example, we are going to do something and we want the cursor to change in the middle of the game, we can do it, and later on maybe we're going to do that if we need to. But it's not a problem, you simply change the cursor using the code, and I'm going to show you how to do it if we ever need to do it. So now we have our custom cursor, and that's nice. The next thing in this episode that we want to do is I want to change a few things in our code. So it's more connected to the previous episode, but there's a few changes that I wanted to do. So let's go into our crafting system script, okay? And over here in your script and what we did in the previous episode was create this coroutine, the IEnumerator, calculate, and we ran the recalculate method from within this coroutine because this way it actually works, and I told you that we need to do it, and I tried to do it without it, but it only works with this IEnumerator. Maybe you can figure out a way to make it work without the enumerator, but for me that's the only way that it works. The thing that I changed right now is you can see that over here we also had the refresh needed items, and we run this method after the coroutine. So all I did was take it and place it inside the coroutine over here. So after we recalculate the list, we also refresh it, okay? So all I did was take this thing and I placed it inside. So we can delete this. And that's one of the changes. The other change was that we used a certain delay before we actually run this method. So in your case, it will be yield return, wait for seconds. I don't remember how many seconds we put, but if you don't want to be a delay, so if you just want the item to be crafted and to appear at the same second, and I think that it looks much better and it doesn't give you an option to click on the button twice. I think this way is the best way. Just type in yield return 0 and now there will be no delay. So when you click on the craft button, it will craft it in the same second. Well, it will craft it on the next frame, okay? Because this thing here tells it not to wait for a few seconds, but it tells it to wait for one frame, okay? So if you want to make it without any delay, you can do it this way. You can check both ways and see what fits your game, but I will do it this way, okay? And the other thing that I change, and that's the most important part, is that we placed the refresh needed items in the update method as well, right? Because I told you that we always need to refresh the items that we see over here. We always want to see if we have more items, right? So when we pick up something, we want it to go over there and add more stones, add more sticks, and we want it to happen in real time, right? For example, there's 0, pick 1 stone, and now there's 1 stone, stick, now 2 stones. So that's why we're running it in the update, because we always want to update the UI, right? But we can also not do it this way, because if we place it in the update, it will run it every frame. So it will run this refresh needed items method, which right now is pretty short, but later on when we're going to have more items to craft, it will be very long. So we don't want to run this method all of the time. There's no need for it. Imagine, instead of just running it when we're actually crafting something or dealing with the crafting system, it will run it every frame the entire game. So even if we're just walking around, doing missions, I don't know, doing other things, it will run it every frame. So performance-wise, it's not good. We don't need to run it every frame if we're not even using it, okay? But we still want to update the UI in real time, right? So what we can do is just delete it from the update, okay? We're going to delete it from the update method, and remember it's of course in the crafting system. And the place we're going to put it is when we actually add something to the inventory, right? Because instead of just waiting for something to be added and then refresh it, we can simply put it inside the actual method. So every time we pick up a new thing, there's probably something new inside the inventory, right? And we're also going to place it inside the remove item, because when we remove an item, something changed. So we also want to update the UI when we remove something. So all I did was go into the add to inventory method, and at the end of the method, I simply placed recalculate list and refresh needed items, okay? And then I did the same thing inside remove item. At the end of it, recalculate list and refresh needed items. Because these two methods are the only place in our game that actually change something in the inventory. If we add something to the inventory or if we remove something from the inventory, right? So we can simply run this method over here. We don't need to run it in the update every frame, the entire game, because performance-wise it will be a waste. So why just run some code that we're not going to use when we can run it when we actually use it, right? When we add something to the inventory or when we remove something. Of course, later on, we're going to also have a situation when we have the equip panel, right? The panel where we can see the player and we equip all kinds of tools onto the player. So when we're going to have that panel, we're also going to drag some tools on that panel and then they will disappear from the inventory. So this will also change the inventory, right? It will change the way the inventory looks, although tools are not really a problem because over here we're not really seeing tools, we only see resources. But later on we're also going to have storage boxes. So for example, I had 4 stones over here and it showed me 4 stones, but then I went into a storage box and I drag these stones into the storage box. So now it needs to show me that I don't have these stones because we want the crafting system to show me only the items I have in the inventory that is on my character. Some games allow you to craft also if you have items in your storage. But I don't want to do it this way. I want the player to actually place all the items on his body and only then he will be able to craft using these items, okay? So when we're going to actually drag things into the storage, we can also do the same thing and we can run this method so it will refresh the inventory and check if something changed, okay? But there is really no reason to run it every frame. So if you run it on 100 frames, it will run this method 100 times every second. And imagine you're just walking around and doing something that has nothing to do with crafting. You're simply spamming this method over and over and over without any reason. So I think this way is a better way. Okay. So we're not going to put it inside the update. We're just going to call these methods when we change the inventory. Okay. So that's the other change. And that's something that will really help our game, especially the performance later on when we have more and more things inside the game. So the next thing we want to do is to add something nice. Right now when we go and hover over our items, it will simply display the name. I don't know if you noticed, but I increased the font size a little bit because it was very small. Never mind. Right now when we hover over something, it simply displays the name and we assume that we can actually click and pick it up. But what about trees or rabbits? Later on we're going to be able to hover over them and it will display their name, right? Because right now they're not interactable, that's why it doesn't display the name. But later on we're going to be able to do it. We are going to be able to hover over this tree and it will display the name. But the tree and the rabbits we can't pick up, right? We can only pick up certain things. So we want to create some kind of indication for the player to know that it's actually an object that he can pick up. And the way they do it in different games is simply change this little dot to some kind of hand icon, and then the player will see this hand and he will assume that it has something to do with picking up, and then he will know that you can pick up this item, okay? Or for example, this item will be somewhere in the grass and it will be hard to find it, so he will also see this hand and it will be easier for the player. So we're going to do this functionality. Again, maybe you're not interested in that in your game, but I'm going to show you how to do it if you want to use it, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is go inside our selection manager, right? Because over here we actually define what happens when we hover over the item. Remember, we're setting the interaction info UI to true, so it displays the name of the object, okay? So inside the selection manager script, we're going to create two more references. We're going to create a public image that will be called center dot or center point. No, center dot because the point is just the location. Okay, center dot icon. And we're going to create a public image that we're going to call hand icon. Okay? And because they're public, we're not going to find them using the get component. We're just going to drag the references onto this selection manager. So the center dot image will be this image of this little dot that we have in the center. I didn't really change the name, it was just called image, but it was this middle sphere. You remember? We added this sphere, so it will be this little point in the middle. So I changed the name to middle reticle, and this is the center dot image. And we want to make it invisible when we make the hand icon visible, right? So we need a reference to it. So first of all, let's drag this middle reticle reference into the selection manager, into the center dot image reference. And then we also want to create a hand icon, okay? So we're going to go to the canvas and then we're going to create an image, and it will also appear in the middle of the screen. It's hard to see with all of this white. Okay. So now we have this square here, and we're going to change the name of the image to hand icon. And we're going to use an image of a hand. So again, it's something I found online. You can find something like that. You can create it. It's just an image of a hand on top of a transparent background. So I'm going to drag this image, and of course I imported it as a sprite. So I'm going to drag it onto the source image, and now it will appear as our hand icon. But of course we also want to make it a little bit smaller because we don't want the hand to be that big. So we're going to change the scale to something like maybe a half, or maybe even less than that, 0.2. Well, the 0 is not a factor. Maybe something like that. Maybe we're going to change it. And now we're also going to drag this hand icon into the selection manager as a reference to the hand icon. Okay, so now we have both of these references, and now we can change them inside the code. So the thing we're going to do is make the hand icon appear when we actually hover over something that we can pick up. And we're going to make the center dot image disappear. And then if we hover back onto our different items, then it will simply do the opposite and it will make the hand icon disappear and the center dot image appear. Okay, so now we need to figure out where in the code we actually hover over our item. So it happens over here, right? Because over here we actually set the interaction and for UI to true. So when we hover over something, we're going to get rid of this hand, right? But when we hover over something, it says stone, right? So it happens over here, but we don't want to change the center dot and the hand icon when we hover over everything. We only want specific items. So for now, we're going to find these items using a tag, okay? So inside this block of code, we're going to create another if statement. And we're going to say if interactable, which is this thing here, compare tag, and that he has a tag that is called pickable, then do something, okay? And we're going to create this tag. So I think I already created it, but we're going to tag all of our prefabs that we can actually pick up with this tag, okay? So for example, let's just go to the actual folder. So let's go to the stick and we're going to tag it with pickable, okay? So I created this tag, pickable, and we're going to, well, actually, let's open the prefab. Pickable, let's apply it to all the others. And let's do the same thing with stone, pickable, and let's apply it to all the others. So now our stones and sticks are all tagged with this pickable tag. You can see it over here, okay? So now only when we hover over these items that have this pickable tag, something will happen. And what will happen is that we're going to take the center dot image game object and we're going to set it to false, right? Because we don't want to see the dot anymore. But the hand icon game object set active, we're going to set to true because we want to see it. But then when we hover on something else, we want the dot to appear again and we want the hand to be invisible. So we're going to say else. So if we're not hovering over something that is pickable, so everything else, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to take the hand and we're going to set it to false, and we're going to take the dot and we're going to set it to true. Okay, now let's save. Let's see if it works. And of course, we also need to set the hand icon to enabled at the beginning, and only when we need it, we make it active. So let's go inside, and now we have our dot. And when we hover over something that is pickable, this little hand appears. But now there is a problem. When we hover over the ground, it still leaves this hand icon. It is not disappearing, right? So if I'm going to hover over this tree or over the ground, or doesn't matter what, it will still show this hand. So the reason is, even though we said that if the item is pickable, show this, else do the opposite, it will still keep it because it happened for the first time. So now we need to say, if you're not hovering over an object, then make it disappear. It's pretty much the same thing that we had with the trees. You remember when we hovered over the tree, and then when we moved our mouse away to the sky, it still kept the name, right? So we created these things here. If there is a hit but without an interactable script, or if there is no hit at all. So we're simply going to take these things, this line of code, and place it over here and over here. So in both of these situations, we don't want to see the hand icon. And now when we save and we go back, you can see that the hand will disappear. So when we hover over this item, there's the hand, and now it disappears. Hand disappears. Hand disappears. Okay? And again, we still need to be in the range, right? Because now we're not inside the range. Only when the name appears, we can also see this little hand icon, and the player knows that he can actually pick it up, right? So maybe we're going to make the hand a little bit bigger later on. Maybe you want to make something more colorful, but I think that this hand is enough. Let's just make it a little bit bigger. Hand icon, let's make it 0.4. Let's make it obvious that it's a hand. I think it's too big right now. Point. Well, that's fine. Maybe I'm going to change it later on. Okay, so that's it for this feature. So the next thing we want to do is create some kind of alert or some kind of pop-up that will appear on our screen when we pick up something, okay? Because right now we picked a stone and this stick and we have no idea. Only when we go into our inventory, we can see it over here. But we also want to get some kind of alert, some kind of notification that we picked up this item, okay? So to do it, we're going to create this alert. Then we're also going to run it when we actually add something into the inventory. And later on, we're also going to animate it. So it will appear on our screen. Maybe it will slide from the side. Maybe it will just fade over here. And again, you can do whatever you want. We're going to start with just making it appear. So first of all, let's create it. We go to Canvas. We're going to create an image. And we're going to make it a little bit bigger with image, something like that. And we're going to name it pickup alert. Okay, no, pickup pop-up. Okay, and now we also want to change the actual look of it, so I'm going to use the GUI parts. No, not the GUI parts. I'm going to use the fantasy wooden GUI. So we have it already in our project from our previous episodes. So I'm going to use this thing here, the irony title. Okay, so I'm going to take this one and I'm going to drag it, or maybe this one. What's the difference? This is better. It has a bigger resolution. So let's take this one, drag it into the source image, and now it will appear as the image of our pop-up. And let's move it over here. Okay, somewhere over here. And now we need to create an area for the name of the item to appear and an area for the image. So inside the pickup pop-up, we're going to create a text and we're going to create an image. So the image, let's just so now this will be the text and this will be the image. Okay, of course we leave it like that because we don't know what will be the item. It's a generic pop-up, so we're going to change the text and the image, inside our script. Okay, so right now we have this pickup pop-up. Okay, it's hard to say. And the next thing we want to do is actually connect it using our script. So we go inside our inventory system, because over here we have the add to inventory method, and over here we're going to run and actually make this pop-up appear, right? Because the only time we actually see it is when we add something to the inventory, when we pick something up. We can also make it appear when we craft something, okay? So we're going to put it inside the craft, but the craft system also uses added to inventory. So we don't need to put it in a different place. We can simply put it here and we'll still show it if we pick something up or if we craft something. So before we actually call it inside the add to inventory, let's create the references. So over here, let's create pickup pop-up. Okay, so we know that this is the area for the pickup pop-up. So let's create a public game object that will be our pickup alert, then a public text, pickup name, and a public text that will be our pick up image. Okay, so now we have these references. No, not this image. Okay, so now we need to make connection to these references. So let's go over here, and inside the inventory system we can see these public references over here. So let's drag the pickup pop-up into the pickup alert, the text into the pickup name, and the image to the pickup image. Okay, so now we have these references here, and let's go back into the add to inventory. And before we call this method, we want to create it, right? So let's create it over here, void, and let's call it trigger pickup pop up. Okay, something like that. So this will be the method that triggers this pop-up, and inside we want to receive the name and the sprite of the item that we want to display when we pick him up, right? So first of all, we want to receive a string that is the item name, and we also want to receive a sprite that is the item sprite, right? Because if we pick up a stone, we want it to say stone, and we want to see the sprite of the stone, the icon of the stone. If we pick up a stick, we want it to say stick, and we want it to show the image of the stick. And of course, we don't want to create a pop-up for every item that we're going to pick up and then just say, if you pick up a stone, then show this pickup. Or no, that's not the way to work. Of course, we only create one pop-up and we change it using the code according to the item that we actually pick up. So we're going to receive an item name and we're going to receive an item sprite, and then we can actually trigger this pop-up and set these things. So when we call it inside the add to inventory, let's just copy this name and call it over here. We need to pass these parameters. Okay, so we need to pass the name and we need to pass the sprite. So the name, it's easy, right? Because we get the name over here. When we add something to the inventory, we already get the item name, and we use this item name to instantiate the item and all. So we can simply use the same item name and pass it as a parameter, so it will know which item, which name to display over here, right? And the second parameter is the sprite. So we need to provide the sprite of this object. So we can use this item to add, because you remember, using this item name, we instantiate this game object from our resource folder. Okay, and we place it inside item to add. So we go to a resource folder and we instantiate one of these things. Axe, stick, stone, and all of these things already have a sprite on them, right? So we have the stone sprite, we have the stick sprite, we have the axe sprite. So we can take these sprites and use them to show the sprite over here. So we're simply going to take the item to add, and we're going to go to the image component of this object. Okay, so we go to the image component, get component image, and then we go to the sprite. So now we simply pass the item to add, and we get the sprite, and we pass all of that as a parameter. If you're confused by that, we simply did this. We simply took this and we said something like sprite equals to item to add, right? We did something like that, and then we just passed this sprite over here. So we did the same thing. So we just created a sprite, and then we took the sprite from this item and we passed the sprite over here, but we don't need to do it. We can simply take this entire line of code and pass it into this method. Okay, so it will be the exact same thing. So now the trigger pickup pop-up method will get the item name that we want to add to the inventory, and it will get the sprite of the item that we want to add to the inventory. And now over here, we simply need to change these UI elements according to this information. Okay? So it's pretty simple. First of all, we want our pickup alert to appear, right? So later on, when we're going to create an animation, it will start the animation. But for now, we simply want to make it appear. So we're going to set it to true. And we also want to change the text and the image of these elements. So we're going to take this element, the new text, right? So we created this reference over here, right? We created this reference and the pickup image reference. So we're going to take pickup name, and we're going to go to the text of this pickup name, and we're going to change it to the item name that we get over here. And we're going to do the same thing with, where is it? Pickup image, which is this image over here. And we're going to change the sprite to the sprite that we get over here. Okay. So now it will be a bit weird because we can set it to active, but there is no delay over here. Okay. So when we actually run it, it will show it and it will not hide it after a few seconds. We can create a coroutine and just set it inside the coroutine and say, okay, set some kind of delay, so display it for a few seconds, and we're going to do that later when we have the animation. But for now, we just want to make it simple, see if it works. So now everything is connected. Let's, of course, hide it. And when we run and we actually pick up something, this thing appears and we have the name and we have the icon. And we can pick up the stick, it will say stick, and we have the icon of the stick. Okay, so it works and it's good, and it doesn't matter which item or resource we're going to pick up, it will show it this way, okay? But of course, we also want to make it disappear, and we also want to create some kind of animation. So we want it to maybe fade in and fade out. Maybe we want it to slide inside. All of that we're going to do in the next episode. And of course, we're going to do a few other things in the next episode. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you're still not subscribed. It will help me a lot. Also leave a like if you're enjoying these videos. It will also help me a lot. And see you next time.